This is Serious Grower Podcast. I'm Anna. I'm an entomologist. I'm a scientist, and I am using this podcast to talk to all kinds of growers and eaters who are serious about their farms, their gardens, their local food systems, and I am asking, how can science help? I do have a co-host this week, and I will introduce him shortly, but before I ask how science can help, I want to talk about how policy can help. I live in New Hampshire, where folks take democracy rather seriously. The New Hampshire House of Representatives is the largest state legislative body in the United States and is the third largest in the English-speaking world. And we are not talking per capita. I'm talking the largest. In order it goes, the UK House of Commons with 650 members. Then the U.S. House of Representatives with 435 representatives. And then third, the New Hampshire House of Representatives with 400 members, representing the 1.3 million people living and voting in New Hampshire. This massive lower chamber operates as a citizen legislature. It represents these small hyper-local districts of about 3,000 residents each. Basically, every town sends a handful of reps to the state house. And there's also these floater districts that cover multiple areas. It's confusing, but it's an intense amount of representation. And these representatives serve part-time. They each receive, I think, $100 a year and special license plates on their cars. And you best believe they propose a lot of legislation. One of my favorite projects when I was at the University of New Hampshire, I got a bunch of smarty pants students together to attend public hearings on bills coming through the Committee on Environment and Agriculture. These students interviewed their professors to get some scientific insights into the topic at hand. We made a podcast together called Relative to New Hampshire. This is what a lot of the bills start off with, relative to this, relative to that. And it was such a nice experience. And I always think about it whenever I worry about whether or not the youth are going to be all right. These kids were just so stinking smart and so thoughtful. That being said, I have a history of watching legislation come through the New Hampshire House. And I had been watching two pieces of legislation move through committee this year that had to do with neonicotinoid pesticide legislation. That's HB 1431 FN and HB 1086 FN. The FN indicates that the bill includes a fiscal note, meaning that proposed legislation could cost some money to implement. So neither one of these bills made it to law. HB 1431 FN restricting the use of neonicotinoid pesticides. This bill did not make it out of committee this year. It's currently marked as an interim study, so they're going to revisit this next year. It reclassifies these chemicals as restricted use, so it limits their sale to licensed dealers and application to state-certified professionals. It's not going to be available to the general public just to put out nimbly-bimbly. Or this bill includes specific bans on state-owned property as well, outdoor flowering plants, and some other limits to non-agricultural purposes. But again, they're considering this. This is not law in New Hampshire. Then the other bill, House Bill 1086 FN, an act creating a committee to study neonicotinoid seed treatments. This was a bipartisan bill that aimed to study the feasibility of a ban on seeds treated with neonicotinoid pesticides. They wanted to take a very close look at the fallout from legislation in New York State, Vermont, and Quebec that ban the use of neonicotinoid treated seeds. Well, this bill did pass the House as a study committee. The Senate ultimately killed the legislation in April 2026. However, it did come to my attention, and I thought it was very interesting. How could this impact our farmers, both field crops and vegetable growers? But first, neonicotinoids. This is a class of pesticides known for their solubility in water. Therefore, there is a concern that these pesticides will leach from treated fields into natural habitat and have an outsized impact on beneficial insects like pollinators, like bees. These concerns have led to many changes. Some of the more problematic chemistries that were more likely to escape in natural habitats because they were more soluble in water, their manufacturers voluntarily remove them from the market. The federal laws governing their use have become more strict, and lots of local legislation has limited or banned their use outright. And you might be asking yourself, If these pesticides are so devastating to bees, why aren't they just completely done away with? If you have ever heard anything about neonics before, you probably have only heard of them as bee killers. Irony of this story is that not too long ago, neonics and the seed treatments that neighboring states are banning, they were viewed as bee saviors. This was even in my lifetime as a student studying integrated pest management in an entomology program. In 1996, the Food Quality Protection Act was enacted as an amendment to FIFRA. This is the law that governs pesticide regulations in the United States. This law was put into effect as a response of them finding pesticide residues in baby food. This was the big onus. This is what had them enact this law. The repercussions of this were a lot of education. The government put a lot of money into educating farmers into going away from some of these organophosphates, organochlorines, these very long-lasting, persistent chemistries in the environment. And they were shifting away from spraying these things out all over their plants into neonicotinoids, right? They had low mammalian toxicity compared to some of these more broad spectrum pesticides. They have low aquatic toxicity, low bird toxicity. The genius move was to put just a little tiny bit on the seed. So rather than spraying it all over the place, you put like just a little fraction on the seed right where it needs it. The plant would take it up. It would be protected. Everybody wins. Now, fast forward. And, there are all these concerns about these materials getting out beyond where they are. Every law is really trying to find that sweet spot by having, minimal impact on the industries that require these tools or need these tools to be successful from an economic point of view, as well as having a big impact on removing these materials from the environment. So in states like New York, where there is a massive field corn population, like millions of acres of field corn, as well as in Quebec, removing seed treatments could have a pretty outsized impact on removing neonicotinoids from the environment. Here in New Hampshire, we don't really have a lot of field corn. We definitely have cows here, but our landscape is not dominated by field corn. Our landscape is also not dominated by vegetable farms. However, this law could have outsized impact on our vegetable farmers, and that's the story I want to tell today. And it's time to introduce my co-host, who has also been following these bills. Chuck and Diane Souther are commercial farmers, and they are the farmers who run Apple Hill Farm in Concord. It's a beautiful spot. If you've never been there, they have a little bit of everything. I actually heard about Chuck before I even started work as an entomologist in New Hampshire. He and Steve Woods were infamous amongst tree fruit IPM specialists across the nation. We would hear all these wild stories about these New Hampshire orchardists who were doing really cool stuff, really cool IPM-y stuff. Those of us who make a living studying integrated pest management, we're often away in our labs, scratching our beards, wondering if we can get growers to implement our crazy plans to avoid using pesticide when you don't need them. And man, these New Hampshire farmers are out there actually doing this stuff. So I did speak to about a half a dozen vegetable farmers in New Hampshire to understand the potential implications of having this pesticide ban from seed treatments. And while Chuck obviously speaks for himself and his farm, the conversations were pretty similar. They all see themselves as stewards of their land. For the most part, they grow for a retail customer who they think about a lot. For some of us, pesticide-free food is a priority, and that's kind of a luxury. But the reality is that pesticides are remarkable tools for protecting our domesticated crops and meeting the needs of the public. The old paradigm was to use herbicides to keep weeds from competing with our crops and then basically keep that plant coated with insecticides or fungicides while it's susceptible to protect it. We call this a calendar-based approach. This is opposed to the IPM approach, which I will let Chuck explain.
We've been an IPM grower for a long, long time, and that's a hard thing to define. And in a quick moment, I tell people it's a knowledge-based approach to managing pests. And managing doesn't mean killing all of them, because that's realistically never going to happen. You'd be crazy to try. So you got to manage them down to a point that either you can live with them or your bank account can live with them. But in its task, we got dozens of traps around the farm and all kinds of crops. We're lucky in that we're on part of the New Hampshire program for the statewide monitoring of a couple of insects. There's somebody here from the University Extension every week. Actually, there's two people. One comes on Monday, one comes on Thursday, looking at different traps, and they leave us a report. And yeah, I look at those traps in between, and I also pay attention to the crops. Yeah. Their recommendations, I take them all into consideration and almost exclusively follow them, but sometimes you don't. And sometimes that's just workload. Other things are happening. If Linda comes here and says, you should be on a 5-day schedule for spraying your corn right now. Oh, okay. And it rains on the 5th day. So you go to the 6th day. Well, did I break the IPM rule? No, but it's not set in stone. We do a ton of that stuff. Sometimes things aren't as pretty and pristine as we'd like them to look, but the costs economically and environmentally of interfering with chemicals to spray is not worth it in some cases.
Yeah.
I mean, I got one planting of beans right now that, we kind of missed the cultivation and the weeds are ahead of it. So that'll be a tough patch to pick, but oh well. You can't win them all. But yeah, the IPM thing I find it sort of mentally stimulating and different than just riding back and forth on a tractor cultivating or, right now I'm renovating a strawberry bed. So yeah, riding back and forth, kind of mundane. It's nice. But when you have to actually think about something and sit down and look at weather forecasts and the temperatures and degree days, look at the crop and look and see what's happening there. And are there predatory insects also present? All that stuff. The pesticide thing is way down on the list of choices. For us, anyhow, and for a lot of growers. I mean, we're not shining stars in the sky here. We're just IPM growers. But of course, here I am out on the field talking to you. It's kind of cool in the last 10 years how much information we share between growers all the time.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's a quick phone call while you're on the tractor, or sometimes it's a text or a picture. Hey, I'm looking at this. What are you seeing?
Yeah.
Or, somebody will say, yeah, we just checked our traps at Nashua and, we're seeing this. Now you better start thinking about it up in Concord if certain pests come in that way. And of course, we get alerts on our phone now from UNH. We have access to a ton of information that way.
Ah, that's such a good point, though. We're not like just waiting for the locusts to swarm in anymore. You kind of know they're coming.
Yeah, or doing the old calendar thing.
Yeah.
Oh, it's the 4th of July. I better spray for apple maggot.
Yeah.
Well, are they there? And are the ones you're catching males or females? It all matters. So yeah, the calendar thing is gone for us on pest management stuff. I mean, you've got some idea that during a certain period you should be looking for this or for that. I just had a discussion last week with Jeremy over codling moth, and we just saw her jumping. Is that second generation, or is that just there was a lull for some reason, and it's still part of the extended first generation? And then what does that mean? What do I do? But those are all part of the decisions that we have to make and the information that you gather and then make a good decision, hopefully.
Yeah.
And we need more research.
Your lips to God's ears.
I know. We need more research on a whole bunch of stuff.
Chuck obviously grows a tremendous diversity of fruits and vegetables on his farm, but I was calling specifically about sweet corn. Sweet corn is different from field corn. Field corn is a grain that cows eat. Sweet corn is a vegetable that people eat. And it is such a critical part of culture here in New Hampshire. You must eat sweet corn in the summer, and it must be fresh, and it must be local, and it helps if you know the guy who grew it. When your local farmer is picking varieties to grow, they're looking at genetics, they're looking for horticultural characteristics, but more than anything, they are thinking about taste and sweetness. They really want their customers, who are likely going out of their way to buy local, to have the best experience possible. And they want them to come back year after year. And they really don't want them to find any bugs in their corn. They want it to be tasty. They want it to be the right price. In many ways, sweet corn is kind of a tentpole crop for most of these retail operations, and it's hard to nail down the value of something that holds such a big place in local culture. For a very long time, the only way to get a really good ear of corn was to get a ridiculously fresh ear of corn, like picked the same day. But because of modern breeding, sweet corn went from, this fleeting, local only treat during specific times of year to something that you can find on the grocery store shelves most months out of the year. It comes from Florida or other far flung states, and it's pretty good, which is confusing. And here's how we got there. Our standard varieties, brought to us by thousands of years of selection from other human beings, are very sweet at harvest. However, those sugars are quickly converted into starches within hours and will pretty much taste like cardboard by the next day. There are a few genes that were identified that you might see referenced in a seed catalog if you're shopping for sweet corn varieties. The super sweet gene was discovered in 1953 by John Laughlin, a professor of botany and genetics at the University of Illinois. He was studying mutant corn strains. Legend has it that he absent-mindedly popped some dry, shriveled mutant kernels into his mouth and was shocked by how intensely sweet they are. I don't know if that's true. The mutation, named shrunken-2 or SH2, you'll see that in seed catalogs, because of lack of starch, caused the dried kernels to completely shrivel up. It blocked the conversion of glucose to starch almost entirely. It made the corn 4 to 10 times sweeter than standard sweet corn. Unfortunately, the varieties bred with this gene had pretty poor germination rates, particularly in cold soil. So even though it was a big boom in production by the 80s, most of that was from Florida, who realized they could pick and ship corn across the country and it would still taste sweet on shelves weeks later. The sugary enhancer trait, or SE, something you'll see in seed catalogs, was discovered in 1974. Another University of Illinois researcher, horticulture professor A.M. Dusty Rhodes, he found a different mutation. He crossed an Illinois sweet corn with a strain of corn originating from Bolivia. It acted as a modifier to the traditional SU gene, that super sweet sugar gene, and it didn't stop sugar from converting to starch as aggressively as SH2, but it significantly raised the baseline sugar levels and made the kernel, that skin, the pericarp, exceptionally thin and tender, and we like that. These varieties tend to be preferred by home gardeners and local farmers because they offer a much better texture and a much better corn flavor compared to the super sweet varieties that are sweet, but they're kind of crunchy and watery. So, in the 80s and 90s, the corn we were getting from Florida, it was sweet, but it wasn't corny enough for us. But by the turn of the millennium, breeders realized that consumers shouldn't have to choose between the ultra sweet shelf life of an SH2 and the creamy tenderness of an SE variety. Using traditional cross-pollination techniques, modern seed companies successfully mapped multiple genetic traits onto the same cob, leading to synergistic or triple sweet varieties. There's hundreds of varieties to choose from. It's a good point to come back to my conversation with Chuck, who was right on the cusp of sweet corn season at their farm stand in mid-July.
I mean, and Diane's getting the questions now. And I told her, I think by next week we should be able to pick some.
Awesome.
And I will say, we'd love to get a little bit of rain on it, but we may move some irrigation over there. It's maybe rain tomorrow, but if it doesn't, we're going to have to move some pipe over there
There you go.
and put a little water on it, make everybody happy.
Tell me a little bit about how you select sweet corn varieties.
Well, I mean, of course, one of the things that we have to think of is that we're selling sweet corn retail. We wholesale very, very, very little. And the other thing is that we're hand picking the corn.
Mm.
So when I'm looking at seed catalogs saying, okay, what do we want to do? The retail thing comes into play because you got to do something a little bit different than the supermarkets. They're going to beat you on price every time. So you got to do something different.
Mhm.
So we tend to pick corn and put what variety it is right out there. Some customers will say, oh, I want to wait until this variety is in, or I had that last time. I want to get that variety again. We're kind of picky about the varieties that we choose. And we tend to look for named varieties instead of telling them, oh, that's S396YZ. That just doesn't work on a retail basis. And I got to admit, sometimes breeders get kind of creative with their names. There's a whole series of ones sort of on coffee, cup of joe, latte, espresso. I don't know what that's all about, but that all resonates with customers. So we look at varieties that way. And then because we're hand picking, I tend to look for varieties that the corn is high on the stalk, or as high as I can get. Let's put it that way.
Mhm.
Because I've picked corn plenty of times, and picking corn that's 18 inches off the ground isn't exactly fun. Or let me put it this way, it's less fun than picking corn that's 30 inches off the ground. How's that? So we kind of go through that whole process. And then, yeah, we do have a sort of a standing thing here. We have not planted any of the genetically modified corn. Those varieties are sort of out for us. That's just a personal choice. I can argue both ways, but that's a choice that we've kind of made. So we steer away from the ones that have got proprietary stuff and BT corn and Roundup Ready corn and all that stuff. We just don't do that.
Sure.
Nothing against it. And believe me, there's lots of times where I look at our weed problem sometimes and say, boy, that would have been nice if it was Roundup Ready corn. But it isn't. So we deal with it. It's an argument that customers don't really want to listen to. But yeah, I could grow Roundup Ready corn. It'd be one herbicide application. That'd be it.
Yeah, and you wouldn't have to spray for worms.
Well, if you get the stack attributes T in it, I wouldn't have to spray for worms either.
Mhm.
The trade-off is we don't that, and instead, yeah, we monitor for insect pressure. We have to use pre-emerge herbicides to keep the weeds in control, and sometimes that's a post-emerge herbicide. There are a couple, they're not very effective. So, I mean, that's kind of the 3-minute thing that we do. Yeah, I mean, quality, because we have to answer to the customers. They really like that. So we're always eating quality. We eat the corn, and there's lots of times we will walk by a piece of corn if we think it's gone past its prime.
Yeah.
Oh, time to move on. We're not picking that because we don't like it. So we don't think our customers would like it. The other thing, of course, that every grower does, I think, is, of course, corn is segregated into, how many days to harvest after germination. So like the really earliest ones I've ever seen is 68 days. And then it goes up to 85 and 90 days. So in that whole process, I generally pick 4 or 5 varieties that are 3 to 4 days apart.
I see.
And then I can plant every 10 days to 2 weeks continually, that same set of varieties. We shoot that corn till Columbus Day weekend. I'll be planting corn here maybe this weekend, maybe Monday, and that'll be the last planting. That's what we're shooting for, is corn through Columbus Day weekend, in part because in our business, our highest customer counts September to October.
When do you start planting?
Typically here, I don't until the 15th or 20th of May.
Okay.
And I got to get probably more courageous on that. But I mean, on our site and the land that we grow corn is at the lowest elevations. We can have frost here in the 20s of May. Probably got to get past that and just realize that if I plant really early and it gets frosted, depending on the stage it's at, corn grows up through the center. So you can actually burn the top of a small corn plant off and it's still going to grow out of the center, out of the ground. To a degree, okay? There are growers that start seeds in a greenhouse and then transplant those out into the cornfield and then cover them with a sheet of remay, we call it, or even clear plastic, all to try to push corn. But we're in Concord and it can get cold, so we just have to deal with it.
Do you have the sense that people are doing that because their customers are showing up in July and saying, where's your corn?
Sure. Of course, yeah. As soon as it shows up in the grocery store, they show up here. I mean, we haven't got corn yet on our farm stand. You could go to southern New Hampshire or like the Deerfield Valley of Massachusetts, buy all the corn we wanted.
Mhm.
But they're just that far ahead of us. 40 miles ahead of us in Hollis is probably 10 days. They can do it earlier. I got to make sure I don't get myself too entrenched and blame my age. So yeah, like I said, I got to really think about choosing a piece of land that may be a little bit higher and drier
Mhm.
and planting corn earlier because customers certainly want it. It's a big thing when the first, local corn hits the market. It's a big thing.
So when the question of treated seed comes up, the most important thing you need to know about sweet corn, there are very few scenarios where this neonicotinoid is needed. Everybody agrees it's overused. We don't need it. However, there are parts of the country that represent a bigger market for seed suppliers that want to keep that neonic in there for early season protection. We don't need it, but the big boys want it. The thing our farmers would really miss is the fungicide protection that is also included in these seed treatments. This is not the case for all vegetable seeds, but it's definitely the case for sweet corn. It can be very difficult to find untreated seed, and there are no products out there that come with the standard fungicide but no neonic. It's treated or not treated. No choice in between. I spoke with one farmer who basically said he would never go with an untreated seed after a failed attempt some years ago. He put in a 3-acre planting, went in the ground really early in the year when soils are cool, and wet. These conditions are prime for something we call damping off. There's actually several seed-borne fungi that will kill seeds during this germination process, damping off. He estimated he got about 50% germination, and the stand was really uneven, which led to problems with harvest, which led to the corn being out there longer than he wanted, which led to weed problems. He said he would never go out without that fungicide protection in an early planting ever again. Chuck also mentioned GMO varieties, and it's actually really quite rare to come across GMO varieties at your local farm stand in New Hampshire. And that's mostly because farmers, they're really cued into what's important to their customers. And most customers don't want GMO for, whatever reason. Again, you get what you get in terms of technology here. There are attribute lines and performance lines. They carry a bunch of different genes, but they all carry Roundup Ready genes as well as BT genes. And they have a fungicide and a neonicotinoid seed coating. No picking and choosing, all or nothing. I caught up with another farmer, and this is going to sound really counterintuitive. He had been growing GMO lines specifically because he was growing in an ecologically sensitive area. It was a field near wetlands. But there were some changes to the federal pesticide rules recently that made it so he had to stop using that approach, and he's kind of playing catch up, trying to figure out how to manage this crop in an economically and environmentally sustainable way. Let me explain, because this is kind of an interesting one. So you might be familiar with this. Roundup Ready genes in part are resistant to glyphosate. This is an herbicide that you can spray the Roundup Ready plants. It won't bother that plant, but it'll kill all the other plants around it. BT genes in part are resistant to caterpillars specifically that live and eat corn. So they take a bite of the plant and they get a dose of a gut poison. Glyphosate, this is the active ingredient in Roundup. It's very unique compared to other herbicides. Atrazine, for example, cannot be used anywhere near water because of the risk of leaching. Atrazine is also a very, very toxic stuff. While standard agricultural Roundup can't legally be used near wetlands either, this is because the agricultural formulations of Roundup contain surfactants that are highly toxic to fish and amphibians. But there are products that contain glyphosate in aquatic approved formulations that can be used safely near water because glyphosate is relatively safe. 2,4-D is another option in this situation. It's a broadleaf weed killer that's commonly used in corn because it's a grass, so you can spray it near the corn and it shouldn't impact it too much. But this is also formulation dependent. You can't use certain products near water. It's known to cause a lot of problems with drift, so people kind of stay away from 2,4-D. So in this situation, in this ecologically sensitive area, glyphosate was really the only option. Because it was an ecologically sensitive area, it worked out pretty well. This corn only needed to be sprayed once with glyphosate. And because the corn was also carrying that BT gene, he didn't have to spray at all for corn earworm. Until the most recent iteration of the Endangered Species Act created something new called a PULA, PULA, Pesticide Use Limitation Area. You'll see this on pesticide labels. It's a geographically specific zone designated to protect endangered species and their habitats from pesticide exposure. It's a new way of limiting some of the more dangerous chemistries. You can find these maps on the EPA website. It's kind of neat. These pools are indicated when there are endangered species mapped in an area, as well as ecologically sensitive areas like wetlands. These pesticides that have been labeled as risk to pollinators cannot be used in these poolas, and this includes the neonicotinoids. So because corn seeds come with a full package of technology, this grower had to stop using these GMO lines, not because of the GMO aspect of it, because they're all treated with neonicotinoids. They could not be grown within this Pula area. This also means this farmer has to spray his sweet corn a lot more than he did when he was growing the GMOs. He didn't want to use 2,4-D for his weeds. He's trying a new herbicide, Armazone, that was approved for use near wetlands, and he wasn't particularly happy with the control he was getting, but he had some clever thoughts about how to deploy it a little bit better next time. He's honing in on that, and now he has to spray to control corn earworm. So you might be familiar with corn earworm. It's a migratory moth. It literally drops out of the sky and lays its eggs on silking corn, and that's what you would find if you peel open an ear of corn and find a little worm at the tip. That's corn earworm. So he's monitoring for pest pressure. He's using IPM tactics. So that means sometimes he's only spraying once if he's at low risk or none at all, if there's no moss flying around. Sometimes it's 3 or 4 times. It just depends, but it's a lot more work, a lot more inputs. Again, most New Hampshire farmers are not using GMO corn. This is a really unique situation, but everybody I spoke to was largely concerned with germination and what they might have to do if they lost that fungicide treatment on the seed. Back to my conversation with Chuck.
On the treated thing, there isn't a lot, at least in the stuff that I've found this year, of untreated seed. And if you do find it, it's sometimes even more expensive because it's not a high volume product for the seed companies.
Yeah.
I suspect that's going to change.
Yeah.
That's just my gut feeling.
Do you have any experience going with untreated seed, especially early in the season? Like, did you have problems with germination because you didn't have a fungicide on there?
I haven't on corn. On beans, we have.
Yeah.
And we've had problems. You get terrible germination. Beans a little pickier than corn. But yeah, we've gone with untreated bean seeds and had problems. And problems are usually just really poor or erratic germination.
Yep.
It'll be interesting to see, what's coming down the road in the future. If there's other ways to deal with the pest, the rot, seed rots, that's
Yeah.
a problem. And some springs are really dry and some are really wet. So when you're buying seed in December or January, how do you plan for that? Quite often you have to buy seed early so you get what you want. You can run out if you say, oh, I'm going to wait till June and buy my seed. You can get surprised. Oh, not available, not available, not available, sold out. That's just a winter thing that we do. We typically start in December, planting out the fields and, where we're going to put what and ordering the seed and plants to put in those fields. So they're easy to be a farmer.
Yeah, all you have to do is plan for every eventuality.
Yeah, pretty much. And then hope for the best. It is part of the deal.
All right, so if you remember, the New Hampshire House Bill 1086 FN was an act creating a committee to study neonicotinoid seed treatments. This wasn't a law. This is an act to study what was happening in other states that had enacted pesticide bans. So while Vermont's ban prohibited any use of neonicotinoid application on all vegetables, New York's Bird and Bees Act really only impacted field crops and sweet corn seed treatments. So let's talk to somebody in New York who can tell us a little bit more about the situation over there.
My name is Brian Nault, and I'm a professor and program leader in the Department of Entomology at Cornell's Agritech campus in Geneva, New York. And I have research and extension responsibilities in both insect ecology as well as vegetable entomology. I've been a professor at Cornell for 25 years. I just celebrated my 25th year anniversary 2 days ago, believe it or not. And I would say over the past 5 to 10 years, my program is definitely concentrated, at least partially, on alternatives to neonicotinoid insecticides. And these are insecticides that have been studied a lot in the past decade, mainly because of their negative impacts on non-target insects, especially bees. Basically, this group of insecticides are very commonly used on vegetable crops, and therefore growers have become dependent on them because they are quite effective. Finding alternatives to this group of chemicals is quite challenging, but nonetheless, it's very important because if there are policies or other restrictions on their use, vegetable growers are going to need to have knowledge of how those alternatives behave. In New York State, we have a law called the Birds and Bees Act, and this particular bill is banning neonicotinoid seed treatments on wheat, corn, and soybean. So these are row crops. But within the corn, it does include sweet corn. So there's only one vegetable crop that this bill will impact. Beginning January 1st, 2029, sweet corn growers are not going to be able to use neonics on their seed unless they go through some training, and there's also identification of maybe high risk for seed corn maggot. Despite the fact that maybe only one vegetable crop may be impacted in New York State, there's certainly the potential that there could be future restrictions on their use.
So what does this mean for the growers that you work for?
Yeah, of course, not all of those vegetable crops are treated with neonics, or nor are they needed. Therefore, I've been concentrating on those particular crops that growers do use neonics on and focused on them. So that would include onion, snap bean, sweet corn, potato, and cucurbit crops. in particular. There are several other groups, but I think at this point there aren't any alternatives. So growers are going to be limited to them. But I know that you mentioned early on about cabbage maggot, and right now neonics are not used for cabbage maggot management. So that's a good thing. However, I have spent a fair amount of time looking at cabbage maggot management in New York, and the reason being that another product was banned, and that's chlorpyrifos, the trade name Lorsban. That was banned a few years ago across the United States, and it was the primary tool used by cabbage growers to protect the crop against cabbage maggot and other maggot species. So that has been another emphasis in my program, is to identify alternatives to chlorpyrifos.
And those bans were put in place for similar reasons, because that was a product that was known to have a lasting life in the environment outside of the original intentions, and also kind of applied prophylactically, which is, depending on who you talk to about what IPM really is kind of anathema to the IPM philosophy.
That's right. It depends on who you talk to. One could argue that it's not if cabbage maggot shows up, it's when. And in that case, treating prophylactically is probably a smart option. But at this point, it's really a pest that attacks early season plantings. It's not something that growers really need to worry about in the plantings in, say, late June and July. The emphasis has been on trying to find alternatives, typically insecticides, because this is a very high value crop, and growers are not likely to just plant the crop and not watch it. And therefore, we've looked at alternatives, not so much seed treatments, but mainly insecticide programs that will protect transplanted cabbage plants. There's multiple ways that growers will do that. They may treat the trays, seedling trays, with a particular insecticide at drench during transplanting, and some will actually spray over the top after the crop has been transplanted in the field. Multiple different ways that growers may or have been using insecticides for cabbage maggot protection.
So to protect those high value crops from having a fly come along and lay her eggs, and then each plant would be donezo bunzo, right? Like once you have one or two eggs laid on that. Is there anything interesting you're finding with your trials?
Yes, to cut to the chase. One of the most effective alternatives we found was to use a diamide as a transplant drench, in particular, cyantraniliprole. And the active ingredient, that's the active ingredient. A trade name is Verimark. It's a bit on the expensive side now, but we expect that the cost will go down after that particular chemical goes off patent. But we found that very, very small quantities of this particular product can be applied to the tray with 72 hours before transplanting, and will provide excellent protection of that crop from cabbage maggots. It's been adopted fairly widespread in New York, but there are still some growers that don't like to use transplanted or transplant tray drenches. So they're still looking for other ways. As I mentioned earlier, using an insecticide in the transplant water, for example. Our research is focused on not only applying insecticides differently, using the modes that I just mentioned, but also using safer products and also biologicals. This particular season coming up, we're going to be looking at some entomopathogenic fungi, entomopathogenic nematodes. It's just some way that maybe we can protect that crop using these beneficial organisms. Fingers crossed.
Well, it's all very interesting because it all sounds like no matter what you're doing, you are delivering it right to the plant, right where it needs to be delivered, which reduces spray drift. I think the product that you're talking about is pretty well known for not having the same risk of escape that the neonics would have, or the chlorpyrifos that you're talking about. Chances are pretty good it's going to stay right there and then degrade in that soil. I'm also kind of interested in the fact that people getting used to having these drenches all of a sudden would be used to doing the right protocols for taking advantage of those entomopathogenic fungi and nematodes, because moisture is so important. Like, do you think that will take a little bit of a shift in how people are thinking about deploying things in a way that would make them more successful in using those bios?
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm hoping. If there's already experience using a tray drench with a conventional insecticide, it's not a very big leap to just swap out an entomopathogenic fungus or nematodes. So that's exactly, it'd be great. Or even a combination of the two, you never know. Maybe you can reduce the amount of insecticide in combination with a entomopathogen that's compatible. in terms of what we learned, I mentioned what was successful, but what we also learned was that some growers like to use inexpensive methods for managing these insect pests. And one way that they like is to use a pyrethroid insecticides over the top of the plant after it's been transplanted in the field. And what we found, even with as many as 4 weekly applications of a pyrethroid insecticide, that we weren't able to get successful management. So sometimes learning things that don't work can be almost as valuable as things that do work. Well, I guess one other point I want to make on some of the research we've been doing on neonic alternatives as seed treatments is that it really depends on the crop. And we noticed that in sweet corn, as I mentioned earlier, that number one, damaging pest populations seem to be a bit less common. And also there are alternatives that are not neonic based. And so that's a good thing. But then there are other crops like snap bean and dry bean, where yes, we can identify effective products as seed treatments, but they may only kill one pest and they may not be effective against other pests that the neonic seed treatment would effectively control. So as a consequence, replacing a neonic seed treatment and dry bean and snap bean may require not only another seed treatment, but maybe foliar applications, other pesticides. So that could ultimately end up in more pesticide use and higher costs. To the further extreme with onion, what we found is that neonics tend to be highly effective at managing the complex of maggot species, primarily onion maggot and sea corn maggot. And at this point, identifying alternatives has been extremely difficult. And those that we have identified have not performed very well on their own. So more research is going to be needed to find out if we could potentially combine more than one of the non-neonicotinoid seed treatments to provide a similar level of protection as what a neonic would provide. So basically spans the entire gamut of yes, easy alternatives to no, there aren't any.
It depends.
It depends. Yeah. Yep.
New Hampshire is in wait and see mode in terms of enacting new laws, in addition to the federal laws that limit the use of neonicotinoid pesticides. I think this makes sense for New Hampshire to wait and see what these other states learn about the changes they will be enforcing through the future. Now, for what I make of all this, having spent several years reading and talking about neonicotinoid legislation in the Northeast, well, as a scientist, I am very uncomfortable expressing my own opinion. Bear with me, because I always want to reference this one show I saw like 30 years ago about gun control. I know it's a cultural reference that nobody would get. So it was a show, like one of these news shows, and they were talking about whether or not it was safe to have guns in the home when you have young children. They set up these little training sessions of groups of pre-K kiddos, and then they put them in a playroom with two-way glass to see how they would respond when they found a toy gun that they had hid in the room. The woman who was teaching the class, she was an advocate that this was a possibility to teach young children just to stay away from guns. She happened to also have a young son, and she swore up and down that he would never touch a gun. They talked about it at home all the time, and he understood how important it was that he never, ever touch a gun. Well, wouldn't you know it? They put that child into one of those groups with the other children, and you can guess what he did when he found that gun. He immediately picked that sucker up and screamed with delight, "I'm touching a gun!" Well, every time I am doing something I know I'm not supposed to do, but it gives me a little thrill, I think about that 4-year-old with a gun held aloft over his head, and I think, I'm expressing my personal opinion. I'm not supposed to do that as an unbiased third-party researcher. That being said, a little summary of what policy can do here. I think everyone is in agreement that neonics have been used too heavily since the 90s. And the industry has really pulled back because of that, because of market forces and because of regulatory forces. There have been lots of changes in both of those fields. There's still a ton of crop systems and pest management systems like household structural IPM, where neonics actually do more good than harm. This is definitely the case when they are used judiciously and in place of more disruptive pest management approaches. So, if we look at these two House bills, HB 1431, restricting the use of neonicotinoid pesticides, I think making these products restricted use would do a lot to remove neonics from the landscape here in New Hampshire. And guess what? There's already an infrastructure in place to enforce this law. So if it's enacted, the biggest losers would really be homeowners. And most of the homeowners who are using neonics probably don't even know they're using neonics on their lawns to begin with. So the biggest losers, maybe they're not losing out that much. But this other one, HB 1086, the act creating a committee to study neonicotinoid seed treatment. Just a reminder, this act was not passed, but even if it was just a study. I'm going to be so bold to say we probably don't even need a study. Banning neonic seed treatments in New Hampshire right now would probably not do very much to protect pollinators. Our landscapes are just not dominated by the field crops that dominate in Quebec and in New York State. So removing access to this technology would have very little environmental impact. Without readily available alternatives, it's not really a matter of whether or not to go with a neonic-treated corn or not. It's more a matter of whether or not to grow it at all. And that's at least until the industry changes its practices and takes it off and leaves those fungicides in place. That might be a little too hyperbolic, though. Having spoke to the farmers I spoke to on this topic, the idea of not growing sweet corn was pretty unthinkable. It's just too important to their farm business and too important to the community of folks who are around them and love buying their food. They're just going to figure out how to do it. So if you're hemming and hawing about what to think about this, I relate. I hem and haw all the time, despite the fact that I am strongly in favor of protecting pollinators. I'm strongly in favor of protecting all the less lovable insects that live out there too. I'm surprisingly pro-pesticide here. I feel very strongly that our local farmers can be trusted to dole out these tools pretty judiciously. And I'm of the mindset that whatever tool we can give them to help grow to scale that they can keep feeding us, keep their businesses healthy, maintain these amazing diversified agro ecosystems that we love and all the little buggies love, I want them to have those tools. I think it's better than getting all of our food from California or Florida, where they're not laboring over the decision of whether or not to spray. That's my 2 cents, and I'm going to put down my metaphorical gun and return to my comfort zone to ask, how can science help? So for how science can help, we are lucky to learn from the research coming from Cornell University and, of course, other land grants. Every state has a land grant university that's dedicated to finding solutions to their unique problems.
I am a little bit enthused with the university right now. Extension is under COLSA, which also has the Ag Experiment Station. So people to do the research at the Ag Experiment Station and then teach it to the students, talk to each other, and then all three talk to the extension people who bring the stuff out to us and then bring back to them what we need.
That's the way it's supposed to work. And it seems like they are definitely making a big shift towards that loop being a little bit better carried out.
Yep. Like I said, I'm slightly enthused. The dean of COLSA seems to think this way. And the president of the university is a land grant university person. That's her career. So they get it. We just got to make sure that they implement it. That's our job.
Awesome.
To keep rattling their cage.
Well,
Well, maybe not rattling their cage. Just put it in their ear. Put it in their ear. Here's what we do.
I was talking to Chuck on the phone while he was renovating his perennial strawberries. For lack of a better term, renovation is kind of a pruning process that happens after June harvest is over. Those plants put on growth this year that will turn into strawberries next year, and then they get renovated again in July. Chuck is also experimenting with an annual strawberry system. This is more common in southern areas that are planted and harvested in an annual cycle. And he is trying something new to control some soil pests. We could look at this as a neonic alternative.
We've been using a mustard crop as a cover crop in our strawberry patch when we're going to go fallow, plow down the strawberries, and then we'll plant that mustard crop for a year.
Are you doing
And
biofumigation?
Yeah, you have to mow it and till it in like right away. Like you gotta get 2 tractors going, and get 4 or 5 passes ahead with the mower and that harrow's right behind it. But that stuff, the guy on the mower, your eyes are watering.
Mm.
Uh, There's something going on there. And we think we see a difference and we were after root weevils and certain nematodes. But yeah, you do have to ask yourself, so what else is not happy with that practice that we're doing? We don't know. We don't know.
I think our cucurbit breeder here at UNH is thinking about doing that for fusarium. So maybe he'll have to come in and check out how you guys do it before they do it at the farm.
Yeah, we just broadcast it and I can't think of it. You can look it up and there's several varieties and have the higher.
Oh, I know all about it. One of them's called Caliente.
Yeah, there you go. Caliente. That's the name. Yeah. Thank you. The radishes, we don't like it because it drags deer in for miles, it seems. And it's like, God, we're just teaching them to come here to eat.
Oh, they like the radishes.
Yeah, they do, which is kind of funny because it's a daikon radish. You can pick them at a certain point and eat them, but they taste pretty radishy, I guess. But yeah, the deer, I'll plant that. And as soon as they start to come out, you can actually see the top of the radish in the ground. Just down in those fields, ripping those things out and throwing them down. Oh, thanks. And then they send out some sort of email to a listserv, and suddenly there's 20 deer. So yeah, I keep looking for the mixes that don't have radish, and I get it. They're little nitrogen bombs. They soak up all kinds of that stuff, and they penetrate the earth, and break up soil compaction and all the good things. But it's like,
Too delicious for deer.
yeah, there's pluses and minuses to almost everything.
Oh my goodness, I know. Hey, when are you going to be incorporating your biofumigant?
I got to get it in the ground pretty quick if I'm going to do it to till it in August.
Okay.
I mean, like really quick. I got to get it around and it's really dry. But yeah, I mean, we got to rip the drip tube out and then put the harrow on that piece. And then we just spin it on and drag it in and sort of see what happens.
I might put that on my calendar and I'll reach out and see if I can come up and see how you guys do it.
Okay.
Because, in theory is one thing, but I mean, I think just seeing it is really important to like get the TikTok, the blow by blow on the speed at which, like you said, you're running 2 tractors, like getting the soil moisture right, like maybe even putting a tarp over it or making the beds.
Yeah, because it's a gas or something that is volatile anyhow.
It's mustard gas.
Yeah, I've read that too. You should tarp it and all that. Well, that's not happening on what we got to do. But yeah, in a small greenhouse operation, that might work. I don't know. So yeah, good things to try.
Awesome. Well, I'll let you get back to your life. All right, and I'll leave you to continue on with your life. Let me know if any of this is interesting to you. Let me know if you'd like to hear more. Series Square Podcast is a production of New Hampshire community-supported research. If you are interested in becoming a co-host or would like to learn more about our mission to democratize agricultural research, visit our website at nhcsr.org and make sure to check us out on our YouTube channel at NHCSR, where we are sharing insights from the agricultural research community and blogging our research efforts on the farm. You can support this work by liking and subscribing, and even better, consider joining our Patreon community.